ladies and gentlemen, now hosting the RizzoCast, put your hands together for Steven Risotto!
What is going on, everybody, and welcome. I am Steven Risotto. I cover the San Francisco Giants for SFA, and I'm the host of RizzoCast, a podcast that features current and former big league players, coaches, fans, media, and others who are regarded as some of the brightest minds around the game of baseball today. And today's guest is Jason Pennini. Jason is a former pro scout for the Minnesota Twins organization, and I've had many guests on over the past few years that have provided some solid information, and this conversation is among the top of that list. We've truly got the feel of a scouting 101 course here. And Jason started as a baseball blogger, independently writing scouting reports on his own for some of the bright young prospects around the game. And then after a brief stint scouting the independent leagues with the Brewers, Jason was hired by the Twins in 2020 and spent 3 seasons with the organization before stepping away from baseball just a few weeks ago, actually. So he's looking for the next kind of journey in his life. If you want to know about the daily life of a scout, what they're looking for from a talent standpoint, how they incorporate analytics, etc., this is the RizzoCast episode for you. We talk about Jason's journey coming up next. This is episode number 129. Let's get started. All right, we are here with Jason Pennini, and Jason is kind enough to join RizzoCast. Jason, how you doing? Welcome. And I almost said Happy New Year because that's something that I like constantly say now, even though it's January 18th. But thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on. This is a cool chance to get to talk some baseball.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And I guess hopping right in here, I mentioned in the intro that, you were a pro scout with the Twins, and I was interested in your background because, I looked and it looked like you started off kind of as like a baseball blogger, doing your own thing, kind of on a freelance basis, discussing prospects. What is kind of your baseball background? And I guess like how did it escalate to like you working for a team?
Yeah, that's I guess I sort of have like an unconventional background for a scout. So when I turned 30, I was working in financial services, and in college I studied economics, and I just wanted to try something different. And I made the decision I'm going to try to get into baseball. And um, basically, I quit my job. I had a townhouse in Denver, Colorado, and I sold it. And I just said, I'm going to make a Faustian bargain and see if I, with the baseball gods, so to speak. And I'm going to try for a couple of years and try networking. And I, went to probably 200 games a year, maybe 220. And I just saw a ton of baseball and talked to scouts and tried learning from people. I think it was April of 2018. I was shooting video for 2080 Baseball, which is a great site. If you're not familiar with it, they do really good prospect analysis on amateur guys, and that's really like their focus. But I was shooting video for those guys at a game in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I bumped into a scout with the Milwaukee Brewers, and he asked me if I had interest in scouting independent league baseball for them that summer, and did I have any sample scouting reports or anything like that. So I sent him over some sample reports, and we got to talking. Like, we went to a couple series together. One was in Winston-Salem, one was in Hickory. And at the Hickory series, he basically said, well, can you move to the Chicago area in 2 weeks to scout indie ball? And I said, sure, like, let's do it. I'm in. So, for a summer, I scouted indie ball, the Frontier League and American Association for the Brewers, just as an associate scout. So, I wasn't officially part of the Brewers, but I was kind of working on a contract basis. And then from there, it was a lot of blogging. Started a website called Prospects Live with some buddies, and was sort of like a co-founder of the website, and did that for a year. And I was out in Arizona scouting the Arizona League rookie ball, and just sort of scouting it on my own and doing write-ups and scouting reports and posting it onto Prospects Live. And at the end of the year, I sort of did like a kind of like a capstone top 100 Arizona rookie ball prospects list. And it just tied in everything that I had done throughout the course of the year. And, after that, um, a friend of mine, Eric Longenhagen, reached out, and I had bumped into Eric at Fields a bunch, and um, he let me know that the Twins were looking to hire a pro scout to basically do what I had been doing the previous season for Prospects Live. And a week or two later, I interviewed, and that was sort of the progression and how I got into the industry. Yeah, it was a lot of blogging and kind of working on my own and trying to network with people and talk to scouts and you know see if I could learn from their process. And really, it was trial by error. I was really, really bad at this when I started, and learning how to scout is there's no rule book for doing it. You just kind of have to get out there and get your reps in, and eventually over time, like you pick things up and your eyes get in tune to what's good bat speed, or this guy moves like this position group, or things like that. There's definitely a blink aspect to it where you kind of get like a visceral impression of what you see from the field, and it just takes hours and hours and hours and a lot of practice and a lot of reps to get good at that. So yeah, really, it was kind of just getting out there and trying to learn from other people. And you surround yourself with people that are better than you at whatever you're trying to learn, and kind of you can learn some things through osmosis, so to speak. Yeah, so sorry, that was probably too long-winded, but that was sort of like the background info, like how I got into doing this.
No, that's great. And I think the common assumption among scouts is like, oh, they get to sit and watch baseball, and they get to like share their thoughts on baseball. And of course it's much more than that. But maybe it's a little different between pro and pro scout and amateur scout. So I guess that's another question. What is the difference between, because we hear amateur scout and pro scout. So in simple terms, to people that may not know, what would be the difference between those two?
Yeah, I mean, the primary difference is, the amateur scouts are preparing teams for the draft. So, they're going out to high school and college games and, assessing talent and trying to figure out where do these guys slot into our draft plan versus the pro department, the team that I was on. We are focused on players who are already in the minor leagues. My role was primarily rookie ball. So, it was a lot of young international signees, 17 to 20, kind of in that range, and assessing how much do we like these guys for potential trades, or um, also, kind of back end of roster 40-man guys who might get released or let go. You know, how did are any of these guys worth going after? And should we add them? So it was sort of a combination of those things. But pro scouts are evaluating players already in the minor leagues, and then amateur scouts are assessing amateurs, high school, college kids, trying to figure out where do those guys slot into the draft.
Now, do you get directed to go somewhere? Do you decide on your own? It's like, oh, okay, let's go catch this, rookie ball game in Arizona, or let's go to Florida, and hang out, or like, is that coming from the higher up in the organization and they say, hey, we want you to go check out this person? Or do you just like aimlessly, because like the vision that I had was like they aimlessly like drive around in their cars looking for like random baseball game. I guess that maybe is more of the amateur side. Pro side, is there a little bit more direction on like where you're going and what you're like supposed to be looking for?
There's definitely, I'd say there's more direction. It wasn't aimless at all. It was tactical and strategic as to who's seeing what. And basically, certain scouts are assigned like certain teams to cover. There's like sort of different models within baseball. Different teams do it differently. So, like, some teams have coverage that is essentially like regional. So, like, they'll have like a guy in Arizona, a guy in Florida, a guy in California, and like that's their region. They're going to cover pro scouting activities in that region. And then other teams have more, it's called org-based coverage. So, you know, a scout will be responsible for all the NL West teams, and then some other scout will be responsible for covering all the whatever AL East teams. And then they'll have those teams from top to bottom. So, like, they have to cover, you know, um, rookie ball all the way up through AAA or whatever for those teams. And then other teams have somewhat of a hybrid system where it's somewhat regional and then also somewhat org based. So there's sort of like 2 to 3 different models as to how teams attack their pro coverage, and essentially those are broad level. Those are the models that they use.
Mhm. And you mentioned like a little earlier that, maybe you're checking guys' bat speed, how they move on the field when you're at a game. Like when you're at a game, like what are you looking for? What are the traits? Because I know a lot of young people listen to this podcast, and they're always like trying to wonder what scouts want when they're playing. And I guess, what are some of the main traits that you look for in a young player? Is it because I know it used to be arm? If a guy didn't have an arm, he was crossed off or whatnot. What is it that Jason Pennini, is looking for when you're watching a baseball game?
Yeah, so I think really, for one, like as a pro scout, when you're in the core of your season, it's a difficult job because you write up every player that you see. So there's this process you go through where essentially you're bucketing players into groups. You're trying to figure out, for me, I'd say at the rookie ball level, they're probably 20% of the players deserved 80% of my attention. So, I went through a process of essentially you're kind of trying to quickly bucket players into groups. For example, um, basically, I'd say, a veteran scout kind of gave me this wisdom, and I'm going to regurgitate it for you and your listeners. But I thought this was great advice. So, there are players who have kind of good skills, good results. There are players that have bad skills, good results. There are players with bad skills, bad results who are easy cross offs, right? And there are players with good skills, bad results. And basically, you are kind of bucketing players into all these groups. And um, you're figuring out, you're trying to figure out where to focus your attention, but also um, at the end of the day, you're looking for transferable skills. Okay. You're looking for which players maybe are performing, and I expect them to perform versus better competition because they have the underlying tools to that are going to play versus upper minors to major league caliber competition. Certain guys are going to perform, but I don't. If say you're looking at a college pitcher who's facing, younger hitters in A ball or low A, and he's dominating, but he's throwing 88 and is more command oriented and is sort of sequencing well and using pitchability and guile to get by. That's a profile I'd be a little more wary of than a guy who has bigger raw stuff. That's just an example of a player who, maybe is getting good results, but doesn't have the underlying skills commensurate with the stat line. So, you know, you're trying to parse through players and figure out who's real and who's not real. That's essentially, what I was doing at the field.
Have you ever what is the shortest amount of time that you've been at a game? Like, do you ever and this is like a scenario where, maybe you go and see someone and it's just like right off the bat, like you realize there's no point in being here. Again, this might just be an amateur scout thing when they're going and seeing a guy in high school who has horrible work ethic and it's obvious and it displays in his, body language or whatnot. But have you ever just like left a game? Like, or I guess the question I should ask is, how long do you stay? Do you stay for the entirety of the game, or like do you leave early if you've seen enough?
I mean, I'd say 99.9% of the time, like I would stay for the full game. You don't know who's going to come in or, you know, what kind of looks you might get at the end of the game that might be worth seeing. I do think it's a little different in the amateur environment versus the pro environment. The guys who are doing work on the amateur side, they have really big territories to cover, and maybe there's two guys who are interesting pitchers throwing the same night, and one guy whatever threw his 5 innings and he got pulled, and they have a chance to see the second guy at another field like that same night. Or there are just more scenarios that I think could come up in a amateur environment than a pro environment in terms of like leaving games early. Um, yeah, I think the majority of the time it's sort of worth sticking it out at a pro game, and you know, just because you don't know what you're going to see, type of thing.
Mm. Yeah, and you kind of started with the Twins at a bit of a weird time. Like the pandemic was just happening, and like w- that must be like the worst. I wouldn't say the worst, but that must be a very challenging time to be a pro scout when the minor leagues are canceled. You have guys at the alternate training site, and then you don't have guys at the alternate training site. So like what were you doing during the pandemic when everything was seemingly canceled? The big leagues had 60 game seasons. Did that like derail quite a bit?
That's a great question. So, I mean, the my first year with the Twins, it was definitely more heavy on video scouting than the last couple of seasons. So, yeah, a lot of video scouting, kind of learning to use some of the different video software that the Twins used, and it was, I'm not gonna lie, I was sort of like chomping at the bit to get out there. I was excited to like get started and like, kind of prove that I was worth hiring. Like I wanted the team to feel vindicated, like they had made a good decision in giving me an opportunity. And so yeah, that first year was hard. I wanted to get out there, but I, under at the same time understood with COVID happening and everything, why we couldn't be out there in person.
Is the first half of the season of the big league season, is that like where you get most of your in-person work done? So it's like, obviously leading up until the trade deadline, I feel like the trade deadline and maybe the weeks prior to the deadline might be the busiest. Do I have that right?
I actually was busy from really March through Thanksgiving essentially.
Mm.
So, I don't have the exact number, but there was pretty rarely a day I didn't work. I mean, I probably put in 70 or 80-hour weeks from March to Thanksgiving. And like there's spring training, there's extended spring training, and then the rookie ball season starts after extended. And then following rookie ball season, we had instructs. So, there's sort of always something to see out here in Arizona. Following instructs, Arizona Fall League, and that kind of gets you up to, basically middle of November. And I just felt like it's a privilege to work in baseball and it's a privilege to be a scout. There's only a finite number of scouting jobs in the industry. And, to be lucky enough to have one of those jobs was awesome. And I didn't want to ever feel like I left anything on the table. And there was, games happening, information to be gleaned from going to games. I mean, you just like I said, you don't want to feel like you left anything on the table and maybe you didn't do as good of a job as you could have. So, I was constantly out seeing things for that reason. I think part of it too is, if I'm sitting on a team for a week during the rookie ball season, that's 5 games on a team. Well, I'm going to write up reports on those guys after the 5 game look. And however, I'm also drawing from previous looks. Maybe I saw some of those same players in, earlier in the season during extended spring training, the previous season during instructs. So that database of looks that you build up over time is going to help you when you have your, short 5 game stretch to write up, every player on that team. So I think a big piece of it for me was trying to build up that database of looks because it's going to help you in that short period of time when, okay, now you have to write up 30 or 40 players off of a 5 game look. So, that's incredibly difficult having something articulate to say about that number of players from that short of a look. Um, and having the background info from even if they were just short looks in extended in the previous season during instructs, you know, all of those previous looks add a little bit to the puzzle and are kind of a part of the equation. So, I think for that reason, I was very much busy. If baseball's happening, I was out seeing something and busy is how I'd describe it.
Hmm. Yeah, well, that's a good thing for sure. And whenever December comes around, like I always think about the Rule 5 draft and I think of it as just like and maybe it's like different from an organizational standpoint, but I always think of it as like something that like baseball would kind of like it almost seems like it would be better off without the Rule 5 draft. Like there I feel like there wouldn't be much of a difference without it. I could be wrong. I could just be like talking out of my behind when I say that. But it just seems like it's just like an added thing on top. Like I don't know about you, but I always play out of the park baseball. Like out of the park baseball is like my like go-to, like
Okay.
I could spend hours playing it. And I always turn off the Rule 5 draft because I don't want to worry about it. And it doesn't really change much for me. It's like is I know you like the Rule 5 draft. It's a chance, I guess, for pro scouts to kind of, flex a little bit, show off their skills. But like, is baseball better off without the Rule 5 draft or not? Like, what is your just general interpretation of the Rule 5 draft and its meaning?
Well, I think the draft is a good thing. I mean, it gives some players an opportunity who maybe were blocked in the organization they're in to get a chance with another org. So, I mean, honestly, I think that's what the Rule 5 draft is all about. And you know, you don't want to see players who maybe are MLB capable getting stuck in the upper minors. I think that was the whole impetus of the Rule 5 draft. And I think from that perspective, it's a good thing. So, I think I'm in favor of it. And hopefully JJ Cooper with BA isn't listening to this podcast because he loves the Rule 5 draft.
Yeah, he's not coming on anymore. No. So I mean, you mentioned like 2020, you did a lot of video scouting. Like how much is data and statistics and analytics? How much is that incorporated into like scouting? Because again, everybody like has seen Moneyball at this point, the movie, and like when I read the book, I was like, God, is this like the same thing as the movie? Is it like really based? Because like the book and like the movie were like two different things. But anyhow, that's neither here nor there. But everybody like remembers from the movie the scene where it's like, the head scout had just gotten fired and he's like, you're trying to, use Google Boy here. Jonah Hill's just sitting there on the side. But like everybody like wonders if scouting is like solely like old school scouting. We think of the eye test, and it's like, okay, well, Billy Bean, someone screwed up because they only saw him. And nowadays, colleges, especially like really good college programs, they have the Rapsodo, they have the TrackMan, they have some of the accessible analytics and the data. Do you use your eyes like first and then look at the statistics? Do you combine them? Do you look at the statistics first and then the eyes? Like, what is that combination on how you incorporate, I guess, numbers and data into your work?
I think this sort of speaks to you know, what you want to know going into a look, right? Which was one of the things we kind of exchanged a couple messages about on LinkedIn. And I think there's sort of two schools of thought for what you want to know going into a look. Okay, so um, one side of the spectrum is, hey, you want to go in completely blind. You don't want to know anything because basically you're avoiding confirmation bias. Like if you know too much about a player, like specific details of their scouting report, how they're viewed in the industry, then that's going to be sort of like your default mindset going into a look. And you don't want to have a default mindset at all. You just want to go in with a clean slate. And, by going in blind and knowing nothing, you're truly giving yourself a clean slate and, um, giving yourself an opportunity to trust your eyes, go in with a fresh look, and 100% go off what your eyes are telling you based in that look. Um, the second school of thought, the flip side of that coin would be knowing everything ahead of time, right? So, um, there's some pluses potentially to that as well, which would be basically knowing where to focus your attention and which players you should narrow in on. So, like I gave the example, if I sat on a team for 5 days, now I have to write up 30 players. Well, I better know which of the 30 guys deserve my attention the most. And, knowing more information ahead of time would let me focus in on, hey, maybe there's five out of these 30 guys that, kind of have the most potential and they deserve more of my mental focus than the rest of the guys. So, by knowing more information ahead of time, it lets you prioritize your attention. So I think, in the spectrum of kind of going in blind versus trying to know everything, um, the more I did this, the more I sort of gravitated towards you want to know more without having your opinion tainted. So, I'd want to know things like the obvious. I would fill out my scouting template, height, weight, name, date of birth, but then also stuff like bonus size. Like, I want to know how much these guys signed for, where they went to school, what state are they from? Like if it's a high school kid from the north versus a high school kid from Southern Cali or Florida, well, the high school kid from the north is going to be relatively less polished, and that's sort of important information to know going into a look. Um, so, you know, I I think you I think you want to kind of know as much as possible without reading like an actual report on the player. Even for pitchers, I want to know what pitches do they throw. Um, Sometimes I would look up video ahead of time to like look at their mechanics, and then I would go to the field, and then I would notice, oh wow, like they changed something from the video from last fall, or they're making tweaks. So I think that prep work ahead of time can give you some insight into even some player development stuff. Like, okay, this guy, his stride direction used to be a lot more open, and now he's striding more online or closed. Well, maybe that's something that um, they're working on, and it's a deliberate change. Or um, in general, I think knowing more is better, as long as you're not reading like someone's specific report on a player where now you have a preconceived notion. I mean, you're really trying to avoid that, but also otherwise know as much as possible. Um, yeah, so I guess how this ties into the analytics is you kind of when you get to the field, you form like a first impression on the player, and that's important. However, you need to like contextualize your look. So um, you're going to see a guy, you're going to draw conclusions from what you saw. However, you may have got that guy, you may have seen the best 3 games of his life. You may have seen the worst 3 games of his life. So the video, the data, everything else is going to help you figure out like which version of that player did you get in your live look, and how does that fit into kind of his body of work as a whole. And for me, that's the value in kind of looking at the data, looking at the video, ex post facto. You're figuring out, you know, kind of which version of that player did I get when I saw him live. And for me, that's invaluable as a scout. Sometimes you get weird looks, like you just you get a weird look at a guy and you're like, I don't know, like if he's as good as I saw him or as bad. And um, you know, looking at the higher level, you know, performance trends data over a broader body of work is it's going to really clue you in as to which guy you saw live. Um,
Mm.
so to me, that's the value of the data and the analytics. It's an awesome, I guess, from a scouting perspective, I would say it's awesome supplemental information to what I saw live. Um, so I know that was sort of like a long-winded, meandering answer, but I hope I answered your
Mm.
question.
Yeah, no, yeah, and it leads me into this next point because like I was thinking about the other day there's a Cardinals prospect that during the futures game he was playing shortstop and threw a ball to first that was registered at like 99.7 miles an hour on Statcast. And like you as a scout, like you could write, this guy has a plus arm, right? Do you need the number too? Like do you need the 100 miles an hour too, like as further evidence, or could you do without one? Can you do without the number and just put, this guy's a plus arm?
I mean, I think more description's better. So if I saw him and wanted to say, if you're throwing that hard, that's probably like 80 arm strength, right? 70 or 80, whatever. Like, you're sort of splitting hairs. He has a phenomenal arm. So um, at the end of the day, if you put that strong of a grade, I think it's kind of understood to be, this guy could throw really hard. Yeah, I don't think it hurts putting in the extra description, just to add color to it. I guess that would be my take on it.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, so I teased makeup. Now I'm going to ask it. We hear this term makeup. We hear it on draft night. We hear it like, when we talk about like prospects all the time. What is makeup? Because I feel like it's such a term that has so many variables to it, so many meanings. Like I always thought that it was maybe how crisp or how polished a guy is. And then I heard another one where it's like, oh, it's about his personality, how he works well under pressure, how he handles himself, how he acts like he's been there before, all that stuff. But what actually is makeup? Like, how can we know what it is? And what is your take on that?
Yeah, so I guess for me, people define it in different ways. I think that's why it sometimes, I guess from an outsider perspective, it can be viewed as this like nebulous thing because you hear people use it in a lot of different contexts. But um, I guess for me, the things I care about most with makeup are, um, you know, do guys, how much do they love baseball? And are they willing to work hard, refine their craft? Do they play hard on field? Do they get along well with their teammates? For me, those are critical components to makeup. Um, and I think another piece that is really important is like response to failure. A lot of these guys, high school kids, they're the best kid on their high school team and they're not used to failing. And some have a more resilient mindset than others. They're like, all right, well, I struck out, but I'll get them next time, kind of thing. Versus like some guys are truly dejected. And, one thing I tried my best at doing when I was scouting was kind of like reading player body language. Like, I really want to see like when this guy has a bad outing, like how does he look? Like, does he seem like it bothered him or not? Or does it seem like, all right, like this pitcher had a crappy inning, but then he came out next inning and like he had a short memory and like he really pitched well. Like to me, that says something. You know, I think I think you're just basically looking for, do guys work hard and are they good teammates are, two really important makeup things. If you're looking at a guy who projects as a backup catcher, for example, well, he better have good makeup because it's just a position where there are going to be other guys with comparable amounts of talent. And why would you ever take the guy with bad makeup and who has similar talent to the guy with, you know, um, kind of backup catcher potential, but good makeup? So like there's sort of a filtering process depending on, how talented a player is. So yeah, I think for me that's what makeup means to me. Maybe get slightly different definitions from all 10. Um, but that's how I would define it.
Yeah, and I actually had Dan O'Dowd on the podcast, who's obviously, for those that don't know, Dan O'Dowd, former Rockies GM. He was an executive with Cleveland before, and now he's working at MLB Network, and he does a great job. And he came on and he was telling me about this like reward system that he has, that he pictures and hopes that baseball and professional baseball adopts. And it's teaching stuff that, I'm trying to describe this in simplest terms possible, but he mentioned Mookie Betts as an example. And Mookie Betts was a guy who like came from a very, not very well-known high school program. And Betts had really good bat to ball skills. And when he turned pro, he started to develop the power, right? And now I guess on the opposite end of that, we have a guy like, I'm going to use him because I know he's a poster child for this, Joey Gallo, a guy who, you know, good power hitter, but now I guess now he's trying to learn what Mookie Betts had when he turned. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, is it easier for hitters to develop power or to develop a good hit tool when they have power already but don't have the other stuff, or when they have the bat to ball skills and not the power yet? I don't know if that makes sense. I think I kind of described it like really backwards, but it's kind of like, a guy that knows the strike zone, who could spray the ball all over the field, but, doesn't have the power yet. Could that be developed like later on at the big league level?
Great question. I'm probably, to be honest, not the best suited person to answer this question.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is more of like a player development question. My I would probably lean towards the contact guy who maybe has a chance to add power versus the power guy who you're hoping the hit tool takes a step forward. But I that's more of like philosophical thing on my part. And you know, as a scout, I'm not working with players to try to make those improvements. That to me, that kind of falls under like player development's
Hmm.
purview. So, if you ever get a player development person on here, I'll tune in and I'll listen to what they have to say there. I defer to them. They're the experts at this.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And the other example he used was a pitching example, and he's like, yeah, Shane Bieber, a walk on at Santa Barbara, had a fastball like 88, 91, 88 to 91 with like fringe to average breaking stuff. And he mentioned that, like, that guy might have more um I guess promise in the big leagues than a guy who just has a good arm and is more of a thrower than a pitcher. So yeah, I don't know. That probably is a good question for a player development person. But I guess for you as a scout, do you feel like you could get much more creative with pitching on the pitching side of things? Like, do you ever project forward to where it's like, okay, this guy's mixing up his pitches really well, but his slider is a pitch that if he uses it more, and I'm thinking about it now, this could also be a player development thing, but his slider, sticks out, and if he could throw this slider like 50% of the time, that might be an egregious example, then we might have something here. Or, do you feel like you could get a little bit more creative with pitching in that way?
I mean, I think on both sides, pitchers and hitters, you're hyper aware of what changes might they make. I think it goes back to this idea of like player bucketing. There are these guys who have good skills and bad results, and you're trying to figure out what tweak can they make. Is there what changes? Maybe there's a change to their swing they can make. Maybe um, they're they have good results swinging at one place in the zone, but they don't swing there enough, and there's an opportunity for them to make a change there. Or you alluded to pitchers with their pitch mix. Maybe they have like a really effective secondary pitch, and they only throw it 10% of the time. Well, maybe there's room for them to increase their usage, and now they're a more effective player going forward. So yeah, I think as a scout, the way I would look at it is I would acknowledge it's a place for them to improve potentially. However, I'm not going to put in my report that this player has an opportunity to get better, therefore they're going to make that change. You don't want to take it for granted, because a lot of guys have things they could hypothetically tweak to get better, but not all of them are going to successfully make that tweak. I do think to some degree it ties into the idea of makeup and why makeup's so important. Those guys with good makeup, they have a better chance to bridge those gaps, correct those flaws, and to reach their ceilings. So, yeah, it's something you definitely need to be um, cognizant of as a scout. And we're scouting's very multifaceted. We're sort of quasi experts in a lot of fields. We're not the true experts, but we need to know enough about player development, about biomechanics, about even physiology. Like, how's this 17-year-old's body going to fill out as he ages? We already alluded to data and analytics. I mean, we're not experts at any of these things per se, but we need to know a little bit about all of these fields and understand how we should incorporate it into our evaluations. So to me, that's what I really loved about scouting, is just so much goes into an evaluation. And how do you basically take all those pieces of information and integrate them into your assessment of a player. Um, it's pretty fascinating. I love the job. I'm really gonna miss it. It was such a fun job.
Mhm. Yeah, a few more things here before we wrap, but that takes me right into this next point. like why was it time to leave? Because I know for those that don't know, Jason just left the Twins after what was it, 3 seasons there, 2 seasons there. Why was it time for a change for you professionally?
I have a lot of respect for the Twins organization, and they gave me my first shot at a full-time scouting job, and I'll be forever grateful for that opportunity. I think you know broad level, what it came down to for me was you know I I've done this job the past kind of 4 years in a row. I'm a person who is sort of always looking for the next challenge and looking for the next thing. And I, I'm a very curious person, and you know, I made a decision that I wanted to just learn something outside of baseball, and so yeah, I'm in a just pursuit for knowledge type thing. I do think I just want to give a shout out to really everyone working in baseball, because this is a field where you put in a lot of work and it's a lot of hours. I think from a work-life balance perspective, I'm almost 36 years old, and I started to think about, hey, if I want to settle down, have kids, and have a family, how does that fit into working full time as a baseball scout? And it's a it's a field where work-life balance is hard to come by, and it's not just scouts, it's front office people, analysts in the office, it's everybody. It's a very demanding line of work, and I loved it. It was such a fun career and such a fun field to work in, but at the same time, it is very demanding. And I started to think about my life um, through a broader picture, and um, kind of made the assessment that in the next few years, I think I'm kind of chasing more like a work life balance too, thought process. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, no, well, that's awesome, and you've been awesome on this, man. I really appreciate the time, and I think we covered a lot of bases there, and I'm sure the listeners got a lot out of this. So, Jason, man, I really appreciate you coming on. This was a blast.
Oh, thanks for having me and listening to my ramblings.
Absolutely, there's no place I'd rather be, and I'm honest about that. And has anybody ever told you, real quick? Has anybody ever told you that like and I listen all the time to Effectively Wild. Has anybody ever told you that you sound like Ben Lindbergh?
I One of my buddies told me that I sound like Ben. I don't know if I hear it or not, but I'll take that as a compliment, because Ben's phenomenal. I've heard some of their podcasts, and I think Ben does a great job. So that's cool.
Yeah. I'll have to have him on and we'll do like a comparison thing and you guys could both be here and we'll have like a panel thing. And people wouldn't know who's talking. Anyways, everybody could follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at RizzoCast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you find your podcasts, go check it out. And more episodes coming soon. And see you next time.